Do you ever wonder what presidents and first ladies were really eating behind those grand White House doors in the 1960s? From elegant French classics to humble American comfort foods, the presidential table wasn't so different from ours, just dressed up with a little more silverware. These dishes carried the flavor of the times, reflecting both tradition and a nation finding its modern identity. So, let's step back into that era and explore 30 foods that once graced the most famous dining room in America, New England clam chowder. If there was ever a dish that tied John F. Kennedy back to his roots, it was New England clam chowder. Long before the elegant state dinners with French chefs and crystal stemware, Kennedy's Massachusetts upbringing flavored his palate, and nothing spoke of home quite like a creamy bowl of chowder brimming with clams, potatoes, and salt pork. In the 1960s, this dish was not simply a soup. It was a reminder of America's coastal traditions, of fishing towns where the ocean gave both livelihood and supper. The White House kitchen carried that heritage into its menus, often balancing refined European fare with something hearty and unmistakably American. The ingredients were straightforward: quahog clams fresh from the Atlantic, diced potatoes, onions, milk or cream, and just enough salt pork to add richness. Fresh herbs such as thyme or parsley could be added for aroma, while a dash of black pepper highlighted the briny sweetness of the clams. The chowder was gently simmered, allowing flavors to meld while maintaining the tender bite of potatoes and delicate texture of the seafood. Served with oyster crackers or a warm slice of buttered bread, it offered a complete, satisfying meal. For Kennedy, clam chowder carried more than taste. It was memory and comfort. In a White House filled with ceremonial formality, the soup offered a touch of home, a quiet nod to Cape Cod mornings and family gatherings by the sea. When shared with guests, it bridged elegance with approachability, showing that American cuisine could be both refined and deeply personal. Today, clam chowder endures not just as a classic dish, but as a symbol of heritage, nostalgia, and the enduring pull of home flavors, proving that even presidents appreciate a taste of familiarity amidst grandeur. Bouillabaisse. When Jacqueline Kennedy swept into the White House, she brought with her a refined sense of taste that reflected her years in Paris. One of the most emblematic dishes of her influence was bouillabaisse, the Provençal fisherman's stew that somehow managed to look glamorous in a crystal bowl. Traditionally, bouillabaisse was a humble dish born on the Mediterranean coast, made from whatever fish couldn't be sold at the market. In the Kennedy White House, however, it became an elegant showcase of French culinary prestige, served to guests as both a nod to the First Lady's sophistication and America's growing cultural confidence in the 1960s. The dish itself was deceptively simple at its core: fish, shellfish, onions, garlic, tomatoes, olive oil, and saffron. But in practice, it required careful timing and balance. Served with toasted bread and rouille, it was rustic food elevated, much like Jackie herself, approachable yet wrapped in elegance. For the Kennedys, bouillabaisse was more than a meal. It was an act of cultural diplomacy, signaling to European allies that America could do more than hamburgers and apple pie. Imagine the swirl of aromas filling the White House kitchen: briny shellfish mingling with saffron's floral scent. While across the table, senators and diplomats tried their best to look worldly as they spooned through fish bones and broth. Beyond its flavor, the dish was a symbol of transformation, bridging old world tradition with new world ambition. Today, bouillabaisse still appears on fine dining menus, though it rarely sneaks onto the average family table. Yet its presence in the 1960s White House reminds us of a moment when food itself was part of America's Camelot mystique. Proof that what was served at the president's table could be as much about identity and image as nourishment. Beef Wellington. Few dishes embody mid-century White House glamour quite like beef Wellington. Wrapped in layers of puff pastry and baked until golden, it was a showstopper on the Kennedy-era state dinner menu, designed to impress foreign dignitaries who might have otherwise dismissed American cuisine as too simple or rustic. The origins of the dish stretch back to 19th century England, named for the Duke of Wellington. But by the 1960s, it had become the pinnacle of continental fine dining, the kind of entree that announced, "We take our food as seriously as our diplomacy." At its heart, beef Wellington was indulgence wrapped in elegance, a tenderloin coated with pâté and duxelle, a finely chopped mushroom mixture, before being tucked inside buttery pastry. The preparation was meticulous, requiring precision to ensure the meat stayed rosy and the crust crisp. A perfectly cooked Wellington represented both technical mastery and aesthetic sensibility. The pastry had to be flaky, golden, and unbroken, while the duxelle added earthy depth without overwhelming the tender beef. Timing was critical. Undercook, and the meat might be too rare. Overcook, and the tenderloin lost its delicate texture. For John and Jacqueline Kennedy, the dish fit perfectly into their cultivated image of Camelot. It paired European sophistication with American ambition, a culinary statement that the White House could rival any palace abroad. Served with classic sides such as haricots verts, Duchess potatoes, or a delicate wine reduction, beef Wellington transformed a meal into theater. Guests didn't just eat, they experienced a visual and gustatory performance, a reflection of the era's fascination with presentation, refinement, and spectacle. Today, beef Wellington remains a symbol of elegance, ambition, and the golden age of American presidential entertaining, a dish that still conveys both occasion and artistry. Chicken fricassee. Among the White House dishes of the early 1960s, chicken fricassee stood out as a bridge between old American comfort food and the French elegance Jacqueline Kennedy worked to infuse into presidential dining. Fricassee is one of those timeless dishes that resists strict definition, part stew, part braise, part creamy sauce. Its roots lie deep in French country cooking, where humble chicken pieces were gently simmered with vegetables, wine, and herbs, then finished with a velvety sauce. In the Kennedy kitchen, this classic was polished into something fit for dignitaries, yet still carried a familiarity that made it approachable. The preparation was deceptively simple. Chicken browned in butter, onions and mushrooms softened until fragrant. Then everything simmered in stock and white wine. A touch of cream at the end turned the broth into a silky sauce that clung lovingly to each bite. It was rustic fare elevated by refinement, a dish that could comfort a homesick president while also impressing guests accustomed to European traditions. One can almost imagine JFK raised on New England staples, recognizing the heartiness of the chicken while Jackie delighted in its Parisian flair. What made chicken fricassee so effective was its balance of comfort and sophistication. It could be plated elegantly on fine china for a formal dinner, or ladled generously into a bowl for a quiet family meal. In this way, it embodied the Kennedys' vision of the White House as both a home and a stage for cultural diplomacy. While today the dish rarely makes appearances outside of retro cookbooks or French bistros, its moment in the 1960s spotlight shows how food was used to merge traditions. In the end, chicken fricassee offered more than nourishment. It was diplomacy disguised as dinner, a reminder that even the simplest chicken dish could tell a story of heritage, refinement, and connection. Cranberry orange relish. Few dishes feel as distinctly American as cranberry orange relish, a bright and tangy side that managed to find its way from New England holiday tables to the Kennedy White House. For John F. Kennedy, whose Massachusetts roots ran deep, cranberries were more than a seasonal fruit. They were part of the cultural fabric of his home state. By the 1960s, cranberry growers in Cape Cod and beyond were a point of regional pride, and serving a cranberry dish in the White House carried a subtle nod to Kennedy's heritage. It was a taste of New England woven into the grandeur of Washington. Unlike the quivering cranberry gel molded into festive shapes that defined much of mid-century entertaining, cranberry orange relish was fresher, zippier, and less fussy. Whole cranberries were chopped with oranges, peel and all, then sweetened just enough to balance the tart bite. The result was a jewel-toned accompaniment that cut through the richness of turkey, roasts, and other heavy fare. In an era when many American tables leaned on convenience foods, this relish felt almost daringly natural, a return to simple ingredients. Its presence at the White House table offered more than flavor. It told a story. Here was a president who celebrated local traditions while hosting world leaders, proving that humble American produce could be both elegant and symbolic. Guests might have been served fine French cuisine in one course, only to find this sparkling homespun relish beside the main dish, a pairing that captured the duality of Kennedy's America, worldly yet deeply tied to its roots. Today, cranberry orange relish still turns up on Thanksgiving tables, a reminder that sometimes the simplest side dish carries the deepest ties to memory, heritage, and home. And just as it once did in the 1960s, it continues to brighten a plate with both color and history. Crepes Suzette. If there was ever a dessert to capture the theatrical flair of Jacqueline Kennedy's White House, it was crepes Suzette. This dish, with its delicate pancakes bathed in a buttery orange sauce and set dramatically aflame with brandy or Grand Marnier, embodied both elegance and showmanship. Its origins stretch back to late 19th century France, where legend claims it was created by accident for the Prince of Wales. By the 1960s, it had become the height of sophisticated entertaining, the kind of dish that dazzled guests not only with flavor, but with spectacle. In the White House, crepes Suzette represented the perfect marriage of Jackie's French sensibilities and America's growing appetite for continental style. Imagine the scene at a state dinner. Waiters carrying shallow pans, flames leaping briefly in the dimmed room, foreign dignitaries raising eyebrows in admiration. At a time when gelatin molds and casseroles dominated American kitchens, here was a dessert that felt straight from Paris. It said, without a word, that the United States could command grace and glamour as confidently as any European court. Beyond its visual drama, crepes Suzette also required a mastery of timing and temperature. The thin crepes had to be delicate yet sturdy enough to hold the sauce. The liqueur had to ignite quickly without overpowering the citrus essence. The final flambe was both a performance and a test of confidence in the kitchen. At the Kennedy White House, the dessert became a symbol of refined hospitality. offering guests a multi-sensory experience, taste, aroma, and visual spectacle combined in one unforgettable moment. Today, crêpe Suzette continues to evoke the romance and elegance of Camelot, a dish that whispers of glamour, international flair, and the artistry of fine entertaining. Baked Alaska. Few desserts could match the drama of Baked Alaska, a confection that seemed almost designed for the White House spotlight. With its golden meringue shell, chilled ice cream core, and spongy cake base, it was a spectacle from the moment it arrived at the table. The magic lay in its contradictions, frozen at the center yet blazing from the oven, a sweet Cold War metaphor if there ever was one. In the early 1960s, when image mattered as much as policy, serving Baked Alaska at the Kennedy White House was more than indulgence, it was theater on a plate. The dish had long been a showpiece in American dining, but in Camelot it carried fresh glamour. Picture the setting: a state dinner, crystal glasses clinking, a hush falling as waiters glided in with domes of meringue that had just kissed the heat of the broiler. Guests sliced through the browned peaks to reveal cold, creamy ice cream within, marveling at the impossible balance of fire and frost. It was a dessert made to impress not just the palate, but the imagination. Beyond its visual drama, Baked Alaska also represented technical skill and timing. The ice cream had to remain frozen while the meringue browned just right. The cake base needed to support the structure without collapsing. At the Kennedy table, it showcased the White House kitchen staff's precision and artistry, bridging French-inspired elegance with American ingenuity. Sometimes flambéed with rum or brandy, it turned dessert into performance art, an edible centerpiece that drew conversation as much as compliments. In today's culinary landscape, Baked Alaska is rarely attempted outside of ambitious restaurants. Yet, its legacy endures. It symbolizes a time when dining was both spectacle and celebration, and when the White House itself could transform a dessert into a moment of magic, charm, and history. Lobster stew. Lobster stew carried a special kind of prestige in the Kennedy White House, a dish that reflected both New England tradition and the refined hospitality expected of a president's table. For John F. Kennedy, whose ties to Massachusetts and the seaside town of Hyannisport were legendary, lobster was more than luxury. It was a taste of home. The stew, rich with cream, butter, and tender chunks of lobster, offered a dish that could be at once comforting and impressive, capable of reminding the president of summers on the Cape, while also charming foreign dignitaries seated under glittering chandeliers. The preparation was straightforward, yet indulgent. Fresh lobster meat, freshly steamed and carefully picked, was folded into a base of scalded milk, heavy cream, and generous pats of butter. Seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and perhaps a dash of sherry, the dish relied not on complicated technique but on the quality of its ingredients. Served piping hot in porcelain bowls, the stew's aroma carried the briny scent of the ocean mingled with the richness of dairy, a balance that felt both rustic and refined. Beyond taste, lobster stew conveyed a sense of ceremony without ostentation. It bridged the gap between home and state, allowing Kennedy to showcase his personal roots while presenting a meal suitable for esteemed guests. The dish's elegance came from restraint, letting the lobster shine without overwhelming sauces or gimmicks. At luncheons and dinner parties, it invited conversation and appreciation, offering comfort in its familiarity, yet impressing with its luxurious simplicity. In a decade increasingly fascinated with convenience foods, lobster stew remained a testament to the enduring power of fresh, thoughtful ingredients. Today, it continues to evoke nostalgia for coastal traditions, quiet elegance, and the intimate pleasures of sharing a dish steeped in both heritage and hospitality. Boston brown bread. Boston brown bread may seem humble beside the glittering dishes of White House banquets, yet in the Kennedy years it carried a quiet dignity. This old New England staple, dark and dense, was a reminder that even amid French chefs and elegant state dinners, there was room for heritage. Traditionally steamed rather than baked, the bread was made with a trio of flours: rye, whole wheat, and cornmeal, sweetened with molasses and studded with raisins. Its flavor was hearty, slightly sweet, and deeply comforting, the kind of food that spoke to the soul rather than dazzled the eye. For John F. Kennedy, whose Massachusetts roots were never far from his identity, serving Boston brown bread was both nostalgic and symbolic. It was tied to the frugality of earlier generations, when resourceful cooks used what was available and turned scarcity into tradition. Steamed in coffee cans or pudding molds, the bread emerged moist and fragrant, often served warm with pats of butter or alongside baked beans. While it might never have been the centerpiece of a formal dinner, it made appearances in more intimate meals, a subtle nod to home and heritage amid the grandeur of Washington. What makes Boston brown bread especially striking is its endurance across centuries. From colonial kitchens to Depression-era tables, it survived not by flash but by function, carrying with it the taste of thrift and perseverance. By the time it appeared at the White House, it was more than bread. It was a cultural marker, a culinary heirloom that reminded America of its roots. Today, it feels like a relic of another time, yet one bite instantly conjures the hearth and kitchen tables of New England. In its modest way, it stood for authenticity in Camelot's polished world, a quiet but powerful statement that heritage deserved a seat at even the most refined tables. Jell-O salad. Few dishes capture the quirkiness of mid-century American dining quite like Jell-O salad. By the 1960s, no banquet table, presidential or otherwise, seemed complete without a shimmering mold of gelatin, often studded with fruit, nuts, or even vegetables. Yes, vegetables. In the Kennedy White House, where French chefs prepared sophisticated menus for state dinners, Jell-O salad still made its way into more casual occasions, a nod to the era's fascination with convenience and its obsession with presentation. Born from the boom of processed foods and the rise of the American supermarket, Jell-O salad was a housewife's dream. Affordable, versatile, and endlessly adaptable. Recipes encouraged creativity, with combinations ranging from lime gelatin with cottage cheese to strawberry Jell-O layered with whipped cream. At its best, it was refreshing and festive, its jewel tones catching the light like stained glass. At its worst, it was a puzzling mash of textures that modern palates might politely decline. Yet in the 1960s, it was considered chic, a playful way to dress up an otherwise ordinary menu. Beyond its culinary quirks, Jell-O salad reflected broader social and cultural currents. It symbolized the post-war embrace of convenience, the fascination with colorful, modern design, and the optimism of an era confident in technology and abundance. Home cooks were encouraged to experiment with layers, molds, and even gelatin art, turning preparation into a form of domestic creativity. The dish also spoke to changing notions of presentation. Food was no longer only about sustenance, it was about aesthetics, surprise, and conversation. For the Kennedys, serving Jell-O salad wasn't about elegance so much as relatability. Amid bouillabaisse and crêpes Suzette, a molded salad reminded guests that American cooking had its own eccentric flair, capable of being festive without pretension. Today, the dish survives mostly in church basements, retro potlucks, and Thanksgiving tables, a wobbly symbol of the creativity and sometimes questionable taste that defined mid-century America. Its enduring charm lies less in its flavor and more in its ability to transport us back to a time when gelatin was both a canvas and a celebration. Barbecued ribs. When Lyndon B. Johnson took office after the Kennedy years, the tone of White House dining shifted from French refinement to unapologetic Texas heartiness. Nothing captured that change more deliciously than barbecued ribs. Johnson, a man who loved the open spaces of his hill country ranch, brought with him a taste for smoky, saucy meals that felt less like formal banquets and more like Saturday cookouts. Barbecued ribs, sticky and tender, were a favorite at the president's informal gatherings, particularly when entertaining friends, family, or political allies away from the strict protocols of Washington. The preparation was pure Texan. Racks of pork or beef ribs, slow cooked until the meat nearly fell from the bone, basted with tangy tomato-based sauce, spiked with vinegar, spices, and sometimes a little sweetness. Unlike the polished elegance of beef Wellington, these ribs were meant to be eaten with your hands, a detail that may have horrified foreign dignitaries but delighted those who appreciated authenticity. When served at the LBJ Ranch in Stonewall, Texas, the meal often came with coleslaw, beans, and cornbread, turning diplomacy into something resembling a backyard feast. Ribs at the Johnson White House symbolized a different kind of hospitality, direct, earthy, and unabashedly American. They reflected LBJ's larger-than-life personality, a leader who believed food should be plentiful, filling, and without pretense. Today, barbecue still carries that spirit, bridging cultures and regions across America. For Johnson, however, barbecued ribs were more than dinner. They were a taste of home served with presidential confidence. Chili con carne. If there was one dish that Lyndon B. Johnson claimed as his personal favorite, it was chili con carne. For LBJ, this wasn't just comfort food. It was practically a signature, the kind of dish that followed him from the dusty roads of Texas all the way to the White House. Unlike the fancier French-inspired menus of the Kennedy years, Johnson's chili was stripped down, hearty, and utterly Texan. He even had his own recipe, famously dubbed Pedernales River Chili, named after the river that ran near his ranch. Johnson's chili was unapologetically simple. Coarsely ground beef, onions, garlic, peppers, and spices simmered into a bold, fiery stew. Noticeably absent? Beans. To LBJ, real chili didn't need them, and he wasn't shy about correcting anyone who suggested otherwise. The dish reflected his personality, straightforward, robust, and built to satisfy a crowd. It was served often at the LBJ Ranch, where political allies and journalists alike were treated to heaping bowls around long tables, washed down with beer or sweet tea. Beyond its flavor, chili con carne functioned as a social equalizer. In Johnson's hands, the dish became a bridge between the personal and the political. By sharing a simple, hearty meal, guests were drawn out of formalities and into genuine conversation. He believed that food could diffuse tension, foster camaraderie, and create a sense of shared humanity, a sharp contrast to the formality of state dinners. Chili also carried cultural resonance, reflecting Texas identity and Western culinary traditions. It evoked the open skies of the hill country, the smell of smoky peppers, and the practicality of frontier cooking. Each bite told a story of resilience, resourcefulness, and hospitality, qualities Johnson prized in leadership. The act of cooking, serving, and sharing his chili was as much a statement of character as a meal, demonstrating that even the highest office could embrace simplicity and authenticity. Today, his Pedernales River chili endures not only as a recipe, but as a symbol of Johnson's larger philosophy: that food could unite people, tell a story, and celebrate both place and personality. Its continued popularity among Texans and chili enthusiasts nationwide serves as a culinary reminder that the power of a simple, well-prepared dish can extend far beyond the plate. Pecan pie. Few desserts speak of Southern pride quite like pecan pie, and under Lyndon B. Johnson's watch, it earned a comfortable place at the White House table. While Jackie Kennedy had introduced the world to the glamour of French pastries, LBJ brought things back home to Texas, where pecan pie was more than a dessert. It was tradition. Sweet, nutty, and rich, it symbolized the warmth of Southern hospitality and the abundance of the land, particularly since Texas is one of the country's largest pecan producers. Serving it in Washington wasn't just about flavor, it was a culinary declaration of roots. The pie itself was straightforward yet indulgent, a flaky crust filled with a mixture of corn syrup, sugar, butter, and eggs, topped generously with pecans that roasted to a glossy, caramelized finish in the oven. Every slice delivered a satisfying crunch, followed by gooey sweetness, the kind of balance that made it irresistible. At the Johnson Ranch, pecan pie often came after hearty meals of barbecue or chili, turning even the most casual gatherings into celebrations. In the White House, it appeared at dinners where the president wanted guests to feel not overwhelmed by opulence, but welcomed into something more familiar. For Johnson, pecan pie was a kind of edible diplomacy, reminding guests that American traditions were just as worthy of the spotlight as any imported delicacy. It carried the spirit of the South to the heart of Washington, embodying comfort, pride, and heritage. Today, pecan pie remains a holiday favorite, but in the 1960s, it served as a sweet reminder that even in the corridors of power, dessert could taste like home. Cornbread with honey butter. When Lyndon B. Johnson took over the White House, he brought with him a taste for the foods that defined his Texan upbringing, and cornbread with honey butter was among the most comforting. Simple, warm, and deeply satisfying, this dish had none of the pomp of French cuisine, yet carried the kind of authenticity that resonated with Johnson's larger-than-life personality. Cornbread had long been a staple of the American South, born of necessity and resourcefulness, using ground cornmeal to create a bread that was quick, affordable, and filling. Adding honey butter elevated it from humble to heavenly, a perfect balance of savory and sweet. At the Johnson Ranch, cornbread was often served alongside barbecue, chili, or fried catfish. But in the White House, it became a symbol of casual hospitality. The cornbread itself was typically baked in a cast iron skillet, giving it a golden crust and tender crumb. Fresh from the oven, it was sliced and slathered with honey butter, the sweetness melting into every corner. For guests, it was impossible not to reach for seconds, proof that simplicity could be more satisfying than formality. Beyond the flavor, cornbread carried cultural and historical weight. It spoke of generations of Southern cooks who relied on pantry staples and simple techniques to feed families, turning modest ingredients into something comforting and celebratory. In Washington, it reminded visitors that American cuisine was not solely defined by haute cuisine or imported styles. It had roots, stories, and a heart all its own. Cornbread with honey butter also served as a social equalizer at the Johnson White House. While diplomats might have been accustomed to elaborate menus and multi-course meals, the humble bread reminded them of home, community, and shared enjoyment. Served warm with its golden crumb and rich melting butter, it encouraged conversation, laughter, and the kind of relaxed camaraderie LBJ valued. It wasn't a dish meant to impress with technique or presentation. It impressed through honesty and flavor, a lesson in the power of simplicity. Today, the pairing remains a beloved classic across the United States, appearing at family suppers, church potlucks, and holiday feasts. In LBJ's hands, cornbread with honey butter was more than a side dish. It was a gesture of hospitality, a taste of Texas, and a quiet reminder that sometimes the most memorable meals are the ones that feel like home. Fried catfish. Fried catfish was one of those dishes that carried the soul of the South straight into the Johnson White House. For Lyndon B. Johnson, who grew up in the Texas Hill Country, catfish was both practical and celebratory, a dish tied to rivers, fishing trips, and the kind of communal meals where stories flowed as freely as sweet tea. Bringing it to Washington was more than personal nostalgia. It was a statement that Southern food deserved a seat at the nation's most powerful table. The preparation was rooted in simplicity, which made it all the more appealing. Fresh catfish fillets were dredged in a seasoned cornmeal coating, sometimes with just salt and pepper, other times with a dash of cayenne or paprika, then fried until crisp and golden. The edges crackled with every bite, while the inside stayed tender and flaky. Served hot with wedges of lemon, hush puppies, coleslaw, or even a side of cornbread, fried catfish was less about refinement and more about comfort. The cornbread often soaked up the rich flavor of the catfish drippings, making each bite a harmonious mix of textures and tastes that evoked the rural kitchens Johnson remembered so fondly. At the LBJ Ranch, long tables were often filled with platters of catfish, a meal that blurred the line between politics and picnic. Guests, whether political allies or journalists, found themselves loosening their ties, leaning in for seconds and swapping stories. Johnson believed food like this set the stage for honest conversation, proving that not all diplomacy required chandeliers and crystal goblets. Fried catfish also reflected Johnson's philosophy of hospitality. Unlike the rigid protocols of formal state dinners, a platter of golden catfish encouraged sharing, laughter, and storytelling. It was a dish that welcomed everyone equally, whether senator, reporter, or family friend, reinforcing a sense of community around the table. Its rustic appeal reminded visitors that the president was not distant or untouchable. He valued authenticity, history, and the comfort of familiar flavors. In the 1960s, when White House menus leaned heavily on European sophistication, fried catfish was refreshingly unpretentious. It reflected Johnson's character, direct, rooted, and unwilling to forget his heritage. Today, the dish remains a Southern staple, but in Johnson's era, it symbolized something greater, a reminder that leadership, like supper, could still be grounded in homegrown traditions, and that even the most powerful tables in America could honor simple, heartfelt cooking. Black-eyed peas. In the Johnson White House, black-eyed peas carried with them a tradition older than the presidency itself. Long associated with good luck and prosperity, especially when eaten on New Year's Day, they were a dish that spoke to Southern resilience and ritual. For Lyndon B. Johnson, whose Texas roots ran deep, black-eyed peas were more than just food. They were a cultural touchstone, the kind of humble dish that told a story about endurance, community, and faith in better days ahead. The preparation was modest, but hearty, just as generations had done it before. Dried peas were soaked and simmered slowly with onions, spices, and often a ham hock or bacon, which infused the pot with smoky depth. The aroma alone felt like home, warm and grounding. Sometimes they were ladled over rice, other times paired with cornbread, making a meal that was filling without being fussy. At the LBJ Ranch, black-eyed peas often appeared at informal suppers, proof that comfort came not from extravagance but from familiarity. In the polished halls of Washington, black-eyed peas may have seemed unusual, alongside soufflés and elaborate molded salads. Yet their presence said something profound about Johnson. He was determined to keep his identity close, even in the highest office of the land. Serving black-eyed peas wasn't an attempt to impress. It was an invitation to share in tradition. Today, black-eyed peas remain a Southern staple, especially during the holidays. But in the 1960s, they represented more than good luck. They stood as a quiet declaration of Johnson's roots, an edible reminder that even the presidency could not erase where he came from. Chicken fried steak. Few dishes captured Lyndon B. Johnson's Texas spirit quite like chicken fried steak. In the White House, where menus often leaned toward elegant French cuisine or polished continental fare, this down-home staple stood out as pure comfort. For Johnson, chicken fried steak was a reminder of the hill country suppers he had grown up with, hearty, unpretentious, and made to satisfy a hungry crowd. It was the kind of food that didn't need explanation, only a fork and plenty of gravy. The dish itself was deceptively simple but endlessly satisfying. A tenderized cut of beef, often round steak or cube steak, was dredged in seasoned flour, pan-fried until crisp and golden, then smothered in a creamy, pepper-flecked gravy. Served with mashed potatoes, green beans, or biscuits, it was less about delicacy and more about abundance, the kind of plate that left diners happily full. At the LBJ Ranch, chicken fried steak often headlined gatherings where politics blended with camaraderie, turning negotiations into something warmer, more human. Family, staff, and visiting lawmakers alike could gather around the table, and the meal itself became a shared experience that grounded even the weightiest conversations in familiarity and comfort. In Washington, its presence on the table was almost radical. Amid soufflés, roasts, and meticulously plated desserts, chicken fried steak stood firm as a dish of the people. Johnson seemed to enjoy the contrast. It was his way of showing that American identity didn't need to borrow from Europe to be impressive. It symbolized honesty, hard work, and heart, the very qualities Johnson wanted to convey as president. The preparation itself offered lessons in patience and technique too. Each cut of beef had to be properly tenderized to ensure it remained juicy under the crisp coating. The gravy was often a careful balance of cream, pan drippings, and seasoning, a finishing touch that elevated the humble steak into something almost regal. Even the sides were chosen with care. Buttery mashed potatoes, fresh green beans, or flaky biscuits complemented the richness of the meat without overshadowing it. Today, chicken fried steak remains a beloved Southern classic, showing up on diner menus, cafeteria trays, and Sunday supper tables alike. In Johnson's era, however, it was more than just a meal. It was Texas pride writ large on a presidential plate. Proof that even in the grandeur of the White House, there was room for a skillet-fried favorite. Its legacy endures as a testament to the idea that comfort, tradition, and regional identity can be as powerful as any formal dining experience, and that sometimes the simplest foods tell the most resonant stories. Okra and tomatoes. Okra and tomatoes may not sound like the stuff of presidential banquets, but during Lyndon B. Johnson's years in the White House, this humble Southern dish found its way onto the table. For LBJ, it was a taste of the hill country where vegetables were pulled straight from the garden and cooked with little fuss. Okra, with its tender pod, and tomatoes, with their bright acidity, made a pairing that was as practical as it was flavorful. Together, they formed a dish that embodied Southern resourcefulness, simple ingredients transformed into something deeply comforting. The preparation was straightforward, yet carried generations of tradition. Fresh okra was sliced into rounds, sautéed with onions, and stewed gently with ripe tomatoes, a pinch of sugar, and seasonings. Sometimes bacon drippings were added for richness, giving it a smoky undertone, while other cooks preferred olive oil for a lighter touch. The result was tangy, savory, and slightly earthy, a flavor profile that could hold its own next to cornbread, rice, or fried chicken. At the Johnson Ranch, the dish often appeared on the table in summer, when gardens overflowed and neighbors shared what they had. In the polished setting of the White House, okra and tomatoes were not served to dazzle with extravagance, but to remind guests that American cooking had roots worth celebrating. Johnson believed that food told a story, and this dish's story was one of thrift, community, and connection to the land. To serve it was to offer authenticity in a setting where appearances usually ruled. Today, okra and tomatoes remain a beloved Southern staple, gracing potluck tables, Sunday dinners, and holiday spreads. More than just a side dish, it endures as a reminder that comfort and culture can come from the simplest of ingredients, a truth that even found its place in the nation's highest dining room. Green bean casserole. Green bean casserole might not have the glamour of beef Wellington or the drama of baked Alaska, but in the 1960s, White House, it carried a kind of quiet power. Created in 1955 by a Campbell's Soup Test kitchen, the dish quickly became a national sensation, showing up at potlucks, church suppers, and holiday tables across America. By the time Lyndon B. Johnson was president, it was already a classic, beloved not for sophistication, but for its practicality. In many ways, serving green bean casserole at the White House was a nod to the millions of American families who relied on convenience foods to bring comfort to the table. The dish itself was pure mid-century ingenuity. Canned green beans mixed with condensed cream of mushroom soup, topped with crispy fried onions, and baked until bubbling. It required little more than opening a few cans, but the result was a warm, creamy casserole with a crunchy finish that could hold its own on any table. Its genius was in its simplicity, accessible to anyone, yet comforting enough to become a national favorite. At the Johnson Ranch, where gatherings often leaned casual, green bean casserole was an easy companion to barbecue, chili, or fried chicken, proof that homemade didn't always mean complicated. In Washington, its presence reminded guests that not every presidential meal had to dazzle with French sauces or towering desserts. Sometimes, The dishes that meant the most were the ones Americans already knew and loved. For LBJ, green bean casserole carried the message that the White House was not just a seat of power, but also, at times, an extension of the American dinner table. Today, green bean casserole remains a holiday staple, sometimes updated with fresh beans, wild mushrooms, or gourmet twists. Yet it still carries the DNA of its 1950s origins. In the Johnson era, it represented more than a side dish. It was comfort food made official, a casserole that bridged everyday kitchens with the nation's highest dining room. Ambrosia salad. Ambrosia salad was one of those mid-century creations that blurred the line between dessert and side dish, a colorful bowl that could just as easily sit next to the turkey as it could the pie. In the 1960s White House, it carried a nostalgic Southern charm, particularly under Lyndon B. Johnson, whose Texas upbringing kept him close to dishes that felt familiar and homegrown. Ambrosia, with its sweet fruit, marshmallows, and whipped cream, wasn't about elegance. It was about indulgence in its most playful form, a dish that delighted as much as it nourished. The recipe varied from kitchen to kitchen, but at its heart, ambrosia was a mixture of canned pineapple, mandarin oranges, shredded coconut, and pastel mini marshmallows, all folded together with whipped cream or sour cream for balance. Some cooks added pecans for crunch, while others slipped in bananas or grapes to make the dish stretch a little further. A scattering of maraschino cherries often topped it off, their jewel red glow cutting through the whites and oranges like holiday ornaments in a bowl. At the White House, ambrosia salad wasn't reserved for glittering state dinners, but made its appearances at more casual affairs, especially at the LBJ Ranch. There, beneath the big Texas sky, it often appeared alongside barbecue and potato salad, a reminder that even the president valued the playful comfort of familiar dishes. Guests found in it a taste of Sunday potlucks, family reunions, and church suppers, occasions where food wasn't about impressing, but about belonging. Though culinary fashion has shifted toward lighter, fresher fare, ambrosia salad still shows up at Southern holiday tables, carrying with it a wink of nostalgia. In the 1960s, it symbolized abundance, color, and sweetness in a world that sometimes felt too serious. For Johnson, it was tradition served with a smile, a reminder that even in the halls of power, there was room for marshmallows and coconut. Meatloaf. Few dishes speak to American comfort food quite like meatloaf, and in the 1960s White House, it was as much a symbol of home as it was a hearty meal. Lyndon B. Johnson, raised in the Texas Hill Country during the lean years of the Depression, had a particular fondness for simple, filling fare, and meatloaf fit that bill perfectly. It was a dish that didn't need ceremony. It was honest food designed to stretch ingredients and satisfy hungry families without pretense. The classic preparation involved ground beef, sometimes extended with breadcrumbs, oatmeal, or crushed crackers, bound together with eggs and milk, then seasoned with onions, salt, pepper, and a few spices before being shaped into a loaf and baked. Many cooks crowned it with a ketchup glaze or tomato sauce, which caramelized in the oven to form a tangy sweet crust that gave each slice a little extra punch. Others tucked hard-boiled eggs inside for surprise, or used a splash of Worcestershire to deepen the flavor. However it was prepared, meatloaf remained the epitome of resourcefulness, turning inexpensive staples into a meal that felt substantial and comforting. At the Johnson Ranch in Texas, meatloaf often appeared at family-style gatherings, where it could be made in large pans to feed guests in abundance. In the White House, it wasn't meant for formal state dinners, but for those occasions where Johnson wanted to be grounded in authenticity, showing that the president's table could look like any other American table. Today, meatloaf remains a nostalgic favorite, adaptable to endless variations, yet always linked to its humble origins. In LBJ's day, it was more than just supper. It was proof that even in the highest corridors of power, a man could crave the same comforts as the people he served. Cottage cheese with pineapple. In the 1960s, cottage cheese with pineapple was the very picture of health-conscious dining. And yes, it even found its way onto the White House menu. Long before kale smoothies, smoothie bowls, or acai parfaits, this simple pairing of creamy curds and golden fruit was hailed as light, refreshing, and just sophisticated enough to appear at both luncheons and family tables. For Lyndon B. Johnson's White House, where hearty Texas favorites like chili, cornbread, and fried catfish often dominated, dishes like cottage cheese with pineapple offered balance, a cool, clean counterpoint to rich, savory fare, reflecting the era's fascination with health, convenience, and visual appeal. The dish itself was as uncomplicated as it sounds. A scoop of smooth cottage cheese, placed neatly in a glass dish or lettuce cup, topped with a ring or chunk of pineapple, sometimes finished with a bright maraschino cherry for a touch of color. Occasionally, a sprinkle of shredded coconut or a few nuts elevated it slightly, adding texture without overwhelming its delicate flavor. Cottage cheese was celebrated as a high-protein, low-fat miracle food, while pineapple, often canned, offered a hint of tropical sweetness and visual cheer, making it an appealing choice for formal and informal occasions alike. In the White House, cottage cheese with pineapple also served a subtle social function. It could be served at luncheons for visiting dignitaries, alongside salads and light entrees, demonstrating that American cuisine could embrace healthful simplicity without losing refinement. For domestic audiences, it reinforced the modern homemaker's aspirations, the ability to create something nutritious, visually attractive, and sophisticated from everyday ingredients. Its neat presentation, bright colors, and balanced flavors mirrored the optimism of 1960s America, a nation looking forward while still rooted in familiar comforts. Moreover, the dish reflected the duality of the Johnson era, a presidency grounded in Texan roots, yet attentive to national trends and modern tastes. Cottage cheese with pineapple symbolized a careful blend of tradition, practicality, and style. It was not flashy, nor was it indulgent, yet it carried an understated elegance that resonated with guests and family alike. Today, while it may seem quaint or retro, the dish endures as a nostalgic emblem of mid-century American dining, a simple yet thoughtfully curated combination that reminds us that even in the highest office, healthy, visually appealing food could feel relevant, contemporary, and distinctly presidential. Tuna casserole. If there was ever a dish that defined mid-century practicality, it was tuna casserole. And in the 1960s White House, it made its quiet mark as a reflection of the era's love affair with convenience. This was a dish born of pantry staples and a certain post-war ingenuity, when canned goods and condensed soups promised both thrift and comfort. For families across America, it was an answer to the eternal question of how to stretch a budget and still put something warm and filling on the table. For Lyndon B. Johnson's White House, tuna casserole represented that same everyday sensibility, a meal that was approachable, familiar, and in step with the tastes of ordinary Americans, bridging the gap between casual home cooking and presidential hospitality. The casserole itself was straightforward but satisfying. Flaked canned tuna was folded into cooked noodles, then combined with a can of condensed cream of mushroom soup to create a creamy base. Peas, green beans, or even diced carrots were added for color and texture, while a topping of crushed potato chips, buttery breadcrumbs, or even shredded cheese created a golden, crunchy crust. The dish could be prepared ahead of time and baked just before serving, making it practical for both casual meals and informal gatherings at the White House. Tuna casserole exemplified mid-century ingenuity, taking humble ingredients and transforming them into something nourishing and comforting. For Johnson, who valued hearty, unpretentious food, it was a dish that spoke to home, to family, and to the American spirit of resourcefulness. In a dining room often filled with European-inspired sophistication, it quietly reminded guests that the heart of American cooking was in simple, flavorful, and accessible dishes. Today, tuna casserole may feel nostalgic, even kitschy, but in the 1960s, it was a culinary innovation in convenience and comfort, a small but meaningful thread connecting the president's table to the everyday kitchens of the nation. Hot dogs and hamburgers. In the 1960s White House, not every meal was a grand affair served under glittering chandeliers. Sometimes the most memorable moments came from simple, all-American foods like hot dogs and hamburgers. President Lyndon B. Johnson, who loved to host gatherings at his Texas ranch, often chose these classics as the centerpiece of casual cookouts. They were more than just easy meals. They were symbols of American identity, representing both informality and unity at a time when the country was changing rapidly. Serving such fare allowed the president to connect with guests on a personal level, creating an atmosphere of warmth and approachability that formal dinners could rarely achieve. Hamburgers in the White House weren't the mass-produced fast food kind, but hearty patties made from freshly ground beef, seasoned and grilled over open flames. The buns were soft and lightly toasted, ready to cradle the meat, while toppings ranged from crisp onions and dill pickles to mustard, ketchup, and mayonnaise. Hot dogs, equally beloved, were grilled or steamed and presented in buns with a choice of condiments from relish and mustard to sauerkraut or chopped onions. These dishes were often accompanied by simple sides like potato salad, coleslaw, or chips, creating a meal that was both satisfying and unpretentious. Beyond taste, these foods carried deep cultural resonance. They reminded Americans that the presidency could honor everyday culinary traditions, celebrating what was familiar and comforting. Outdoor cookouts featuring hot dogs and hamburgers fostered camaraderie, encouraged casual conversation, and showcased a side of presidential life that contrasted sharply with the opulence of formal banquets. They reinforced the idea that food could bridge gaps between politics and people, proving that even amid pressing national concerns, the simple joys of grilling and sharing a meal could carry significant symbolic weight. Today, while ubiquitous across America, hot dogs and hamburgers at the LBJ White House remain a testament to the enduring power of straightforward, heartfelt cuisine. Comfort food elevated by context, companionship, and the unmistakable stamp of Texas hospitality, cheese soufflé. In the 1960s White House, cheese soufflé embodied a touch of French sophistication that was very much in vogue. While America remained deeply attached to its casseroles, pies, and hearty meats, the decade also carried a fascination with continental elegance, and soufflé was the perfect example. Light, airy, and dramatic in presentation, it combined the rustic comfort of cheese with the refined technique of classic French cookery, a balance that suited White House entertaining when the menu needed to impress without overwhelming. Cheese soufflé was both approachable and aspirational, allowing the kitchen staff to demonstrate skill while offering guests a dish that was both visually stunning and delicious. The preparation required precision and patience. A bechamel base was enriched with egg yolks and flavored with a sharp cheese, often Gruyere or aged cheddar, lending depth and a gentle tang. The key to its signature height came from folding in stiffly beaten egg whites, creating an airy structure that puffed dramatically in the oven. Even the timing of serving mattered. Remove it too early and it remained flat. Serve it too late and it could collapse, losing its theatrical allure. This delicate interplay of technique and timing made the dish a small triumph of culinary skill. Beyond the technical challenge, cheese soufflé offered versatility. It could be subtly flavored with herbs like chives or tarragon, or enriched with spices to complement the broader menu, making it suitable for both casual White House lunches and formal state dinners. Its presentation, golden, puffed, and steaming, always commanded attention, evoking admiration before the first forkful even touched the palate. For staff, perfecting a soufflé became a point of pride, a demonstration that American chefs could execute French-inspired cuisine with confidence and elegance. Culturally, the dish represented a bridging of worlds: comfort and sophistication, domestic tradition and European influence, the everyday and the extraordinary. In the context of the Kennedy and early Johnson White House, cheese soufflé signaled a commitment to culinary artistry and the joy of sharing something beautiful and delicious with guests. Today, it retains its nostalgic appeal, symbolizing a time when food was as much about presentation and care as it was about sustenance. In its heyday, cheese soufflé was more than a dish. It was a declaration that even simple ingredients, handled with skill, could achieve elegance worthy of the nation's highest pull. Deviled eggs. In the 1960s, White House deviled eggs were more than just a humble appetizer. They were a reliable staple of entertaining, equally at home on a formal buffet table, as they were at a backyard gathering. Their popularity came from the fact that they were simple to prepare yet offered endless room for embellishment, making them a dish that felt both familiar and a little special. By the time they appeared in White House spreads, deviled eggs had already been beloved across America for generations, embodying the kind of comfort and nostalgia that made guests feel at ease while allowing chefs to showcase creativity within a familiar format. The preparation was deceptively simple. Hard-boiled eggs halved, their yolks mashed with mayonnaise, mustard, and a splash of vinegar, then seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes a hint of paprika or cayenne. In more ambitious renditions, cooks added chopped pickles, herbs, pimentos, or even a touch of horseradish to elevate the flavor. The filling could be spooned or piped with finesse, creating visually appealing swirls atop the glossy egg whites. In the White House kitchens, staff could scale the recipe to feed dozens of guests, ensuring that the eggs were both practical and elegant, a perfect marriage of convenience and presentation. Deviled eggs captured the mid-century fascination with hors d'oeuvres that were both sophisticated and approachable, bridging the gap between casual home entertaining and formal receptions. They appeared at luncheons, cocktail parties, and evening gatherings, often alongside cheese trays, finger sandwiches, and other small bites designed for mingling. Beyond their flavor, they symbolized hospitality and attention to detail, demonstrating that even the simplest dishes could carry a sense of ceremony. Today, deviled eggs continue to evoke nostalgia. Their creamy, tangy filling and delicate presentation, reminding us that in the 1960s, as now, sometimes the simplest foods make the most lasting impressions. Baked ham with cloves. In the 1960s White House, baked ham with cloves was more than just a meal. It was a statement of tradition, celebration, and the kind of understated elegance that could suit both a family-style holiday dinner and a formal reception. Ham had long been a fixture on American tables, particularly in the South and Midwest, where its sweet, salty richness evoked warmth, abundance, and festivity. At the Kennedy and Johnson tables alike, the ham became a centerpiece that married familiarity with pageantry, especially when the surface was carefully scored in a diamond pattern and each intersection studded with aromatic cloves. The cloves not only added a subtle spice, but also filled the room with an unmistakable scent of celebration, signaling that a special meal was underway. The preparation was deliberate but rewarding. A whole ham was baked slowly, often basted in a glaze made from brown sugar, honey, or fruit juice such as pineapple or orange, which caramelized in the oven to form a glossy golden crust. The result was a dish that looked as impressive as it tasted, offering both visual theater and comforting flavors. In the White House, it could feed a crowd of officials, family, and staff, while leftovers transformed into sandwiches, omelets, or soups, reflecting mid-century thrift and practicality. Beyond its flavor, baked ham with cloves carried ceremonial significance. The dish often marked holidays, official receptions, or family gatherings, bridging personal tradition and statecraft. Its scent and presentation created an atmosphere of warmth and hospitality, immediately signaling that guests were welcome and that the meal was meant to be savored. For the White House chefs, achieving the perfect balance of glaze, spice, and tenderness was a point of pride, a subtle way to demonstrate skill without resorting to extravagant techniques. Culturally, the ham reflected mid-century American culinary values: resourcefulness, flavor, and visual appeal. Its place in the presidential table reminded diners that even in a seat of political power, comfort and heritage mattered. Today, baked ham with cloves endures as a holiday classic, a dish that evokes family, festivity, and timeless culinary craftsmanship. Its continued popularity underscores how a single, well-prepared centerpiece can honor tradition while conveying elegance, proving that simple ingredients, handled with care, can achieve something truly memorable. Stuffed bell peppers. Stuffed bell peppers were a quintessential dish of the 1960s, hearty enough to serve as a main course, yet polished enough to appear at a White House luncheon. They fit perfectly into the era's fascination with colorful presentation, as the bright red, green, and yellow peppers doubled as both serving vessels and edible bowls. The concept was deceptively simple, but the result always looked impressive. A balance of practicality and visual appeal that suited a first family menu where comfort food could be elevated to something refined and inviting. In many ways, stuffed peppers reflected the optimistic and inventive spirit of mid-century American cooking, blending frugality with flair. The filling typically combined ground beef or pork with cooked rice, onions, and tomato sauce, seasoned modestly to highlight the natural flavors of the ingredients. Sometimes, cheese or breadcrumbs topped the peppers, melting or crisping in the oven to add a final touch of richness and texture. White House chefs appreciated the dish's flexibility. It could be prepared ahead of time, adjusted for dietary preferences, and plated neatly without sacrificing charm. Its tidy portions made it ideal for luncheons or more intimate dinners, while its vibrant colors gave the table a festive, appealing look. Beyond aesthetics, stuffed bell peppers embodied a clever use of resources. They stretched a small amount of meat to feed multiple guests, balanced protein with vegetables, and incorporated pantry staples in a way that felt thoughtful rather than meager. At the Johnson White House, a tray of these peppers likely served as a comforting reminder that even amid state dinners and elaborate menus, food could be nourishing, practical, and visually satisfying. Today, the dish endures as a nostalgic favorite, evoking mid-century kitchens where economy and elegance shared the same plate, and every meal was prepared with both care and style. Angel food cake. Angel food cake was a dessert that truly captured the spirit of lightness, elegance, and ingenuity in the 1960s, an era when American dining was embracing sophistication without abandoning cherished homegrown traditions. Its ethereal texture and pristine white crumb made it a visually striking centerpiece, perfect for both everyday family tables and the polished dessert spreads of the White House. The cake's magic came from its simplicity in ingredients paired with precision in technique. Dozens of egg whites whipped into glossy, airy peaks, folded carefully with sugar and flour, then baked in a tall tube pan until it rose like a delicate cloud. Free of butter or fat, it was as much about clever culinary engineering as it was about taste. And in a decade increasingly attuned to health and appearance, angel food cake carried a subtle allure. Within the White House, angel food cake found its place at luncheons, teas, and more intimate gatherings. Often accompanied by fresh berries, citrus glazes, or a gentle dollop of whipped cream, it provided a refreshing counterpoint to richer desserts like baked Alaska or a pecan pie. Its lightness allowed it to charm guests without overwhelming the palate, serving as a visual and gustatory exclamation point at the end of a meal. Beyond the formal dining rooms, the cake represented a connection to American home kitchens, where cooks had long learned to transform leftover egg whites into something extraordinary rather than waste them. It was both humble and elegant, a dessert that bridged practicality and showmanship. But angel food cake was also emblematic of the era's fascination with presentation and ceremony. Its towering, perfectly risen form encouraged careful slicing, allowing each portion to reveal a delicate, pillowy crumb that seemed almost too light to touch. Served with a drizzle of angel food cake also spoke to the post-war optimism of the 1960s, a time when Americans were eager to embrace elegance and refinement without losing sight of resourcefulness. Housewives and home bakers alike could take pride in mastering the challenging folding techniques, producing a dessert that was both impressive and inherently American in its ingenuity. Its enduring appeal lies not only in its airy texture and delicate sweetness, but also in the story it tells of creativity, precision, and joy in everyday culinary life. Even today, a slice evokes nostalgia, calling to mind formal teas, family celebrations, and the playful sophistication that defined the 1960s American table. In essence, angel food cake was more than dessert. It was an idea, a symbol of balance between artistry and accessibility, refinement and tradition. It reminds us that even the simplest ingredients, handled with care and imagination, can produce something truly extraordinary. A testament to the ingenuity and elegance of mid-century American cuisine. Shrimp cocktail. Shrimp cocktail was the epitome of mid-century sophistication, a dish that regularly graced the tables of White House receptions and state dinners throughout the 1960s. It combined glamour and simplicity in a way few dishes could. Plump pink shrimp arranged gracefully around the rim of a crystal goblet, with a tangy, spicy cocktail sauce at the center, waiting to be dipped into. Despite its striking appearance, the preparation was straightforward. The shrimp were poached briefly until tender but still firm, then chilled over ice to lock in their texture and color. The sauce, made from ketchup, horseradish, lemon juice, and a dash of Worcestershire, added a bright, zesty kick that balanced the sweetness of the seafood. The result was a dish that was both refreshing and indulgent, sophisticated yet entirely approachable, and perfect for large gatherings. In the White House of the 1960s, shrimp cocktails symbolized modern American dining and cosmopolitan taste. Its appearance at receptions projected elegance without pretension, showing that the United States could host with style while staying practical. It also adapted well to the growing era of televised diplomacy, offering a visually appealing dish that looked impressive on camera. Beyond the official dinners, shrimp cocktail became a home entertainer's secret weapon, bringing a touch of high society into suburban kitchens without requiring complex technique. Today, shrimp cocktail feels delightfully retro, a nod to mid-century charm and culinary confidence. Yet in its heyday, it represented more than an appetizer. It was celebration in miniature, a combination of flavor, flair, and refinement that made every guest feel special even before the first bite. It reminds us that elegance doesn't have to be complicated, and that simple ingredients, treated with care, can create unforgettable dining moments. That was a delicious trip through the White House kitchens of the 1960s, where every dish told its own story of tradition, elegance, and a changing America. Which of these foods brought back memories for you or surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more culinary history, and pass it along to a friend who loves a good taste of nostalgia.